Well, welcome to the 700 Club. One of the biggest changes from the Obama administration to the Trump administration has been America's treatment of Israel and some of the people who support the Jewish state here in the U.S.
Paul Strand brings us this report on how the IRS targeted a pro-Israel group and about just where U.S. taxpayer dollars are spent in the Middle East.
There's talk of how the Obama administration weaponized many federal agencies. The Marcuses here in Penn Valley, Pennsylvania know it's true because they had to fight some of those weapons in a years-long struggle with the IRS. And it appears it was just because their nonprofit may have been a little too friendly with the state of Israel. They wanted tax-exempt status for their organization Z Street, the Z standing for Zion. But instead of getting the normal approval in 3 to 6 months, the IRS held up their application for 7 years, beginning in and continuing through the Obama years. And the Marcuses heard
there's a special unit in Washington, D.C., which looks at these applications to determine whether the organization's activities are inconsistent with the Obama administration's policies.
Z Street believes in the right of Jews to live anywhere, including biblical Judea and Samaria, the areas commonly known as the occupied territories, which include cities and towns called settlements.
The IRS officials tried to see whether they could revoke tax-exempt status for organizations that support what's called the settlements.
That's an example of what's called viewpoint discrimination, where an organization gets treated differently by the government because its viewpoints are different from the government's positions. In this case, those of the Obama administration in the Middle East. Jonathan Schanzer of the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies.
This was part of an overall campaign being waged by the Obama administration to isolate Israel for its settlement activity.
But the Marcuses are lawyers, and so Z Street sued the IRS, saying the agency was violating their constitutional rights by denying them their application for tax-exempt status as a nonprofit group. The IRS fought back with all sorts of arguments, all eventually thrown out by courts. One of those arguments was,
oh, we can't sue them because they're the government. Excuse me? I mean, the Bill of Rights was created to protect citizens from constitutional violations by the government.
The tax agency then hinted maybe Z Street would be supporting terrorism if it supported Israel.
Israel is a country where terrorism happens to Israelis. They're not the perpetrators of terrorism.
The Marcuses also found during the long battle that the government was also asking questions about the views of other pro-Israel nonprofit groups.
And they were asked, what are your religious beliefs about the existence of the land of Israel? That's astounding that the IRS, anyone at the IRS could think that that would be a legitimate question.
The feds finally gave up and settled on February 1st.
And I'm sure that they thought they would just, grind us to dust. But they didn't realize we're like terriers. We got our teeth in the calves of these people and we didn't let go.
So that was Z Street's fight with the federal government. But there's evidence of this antipathy towards Israel in more agencies than just the IRS. Like at the State Department, Schanzer says that during the Obama years,
it isolated Israel as a policy. The decision to shift toward Iran in particular, also probably the Muslim Brotherhood during the Arab Spring. This was the inclination of those within the State Department, within our diplomatic ranks.
But such a bias meant taxpayer money ended up funding groups which supported Palestinians but opposed Israel.
We provide roughly $600 million a year as U.S. taxpayers to the Palestinians.
Dollars from government agencies like the U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID, are supposed to basically be charity, but it can be hard to find out just where the money is or isn't going.
We had real issues with the lack of transparency at the State Department.
Yonah Schiffmiller is with NGO Monitor in Israel. He said the problem has been that
it was very, very difficult to ascertain which were the organizations that were receiving funds, what the size of the funds were, for what purpose.
Some of the funds are easier to track than others. Overall, though, I think that the American taxpayer has reached a point of frustration.
With the Trump administration being so friendly towards the state of Israel, maybe this is going to go away. But as Trump himself might point out, there's still the deep state and the Washington swamp that needs to be cleared out before such problems can be totally cleared up. Paul Strand, CBN News, reporting from Penn Valley, Pennsylvania.
Well, if there was ever a story that ought to make you mad, that story ought to make you mad. Here we have government employees who are sworn to uphold the Constitution, acting in clear violation of the Constitution and limiting free speech, limiting freedom of assembly, and withholding what they should do as government employees. They should expeditiously process these kinds of applications to the IRS so people can take advantage of the laws that Congress has passed. They're acting illegally, they're acting unconstitutionally, but unfortunately, they're acting without any penalty at all. When you look at all of the IRS cases recently, all the Tea Party cases, everything that's happened where it's been exposed, they withheld these organizations' registrations for political reasons or ideological reasons. The employees that did that have suffered no consequences at all. I find that absolutely incredible. But in this case, it's not just the IRS. You have officials within the Treasury Department calling and talking with officials within the State Department. And according to that lawsuit, there was one employee in the diplomatic corps in Israel inquiring, can we revoke the tax-exempt status of nonprofit American organizations who are supporting Israel and the West Bank? I find that absolutely incredible that you would use the IRS as a weapon in order to change policy. I mean, it just it's mind-boggling. And they do it seemingly with impunity. There's no penalty at all. And it's nothing new. When you go back to the recognition of Israel in 1948, Truman had to overcome his own State Department. When you look forward to what Kermit Roosevelt did, here he's the CIA operative that engineered the coup in Iran back in the 1950s. He set up a fund using CIA money, taxpayer money, in order to lobby for pro-Arab causes within the United States, and he did that in the 1960s. You see this again and again and again. But for the IRS to get away with asking questions about religious belief, drumming up fake things that you're somehow supporting terrorism, well, here's the real thing that's going on. Our taxpayer dollars are supporting Palestinian terrorists. We have already proven it. The pay-to-slave program within the Palestinian Authority, our tax dollars, not our donations, our tax dollars are going to support the terrorists and their families. And it's about time that that stop. And I think we need to have a full audit of the support that the U.S. has given the Palestinian Authority. It's over $5 billion in just USAID since 1994. Let's take a look at that. But there's $350 million of our tax dollars going to pay terrorists and their families in the West Bank and in the Gaza Strip. And it's the pay-to-slave program, and they're paid based on how much damage they do. How many Israelis do they kill? And there's incentives for it. That needs to end. Right now, there's a bill before the Senate. It's already passed the House of Representatives. It's called the Taylor Force Act. What I want you to do is go to the phone and call the Capitol switchboard. Ask for your senator. You're going to have to make 2 calls so you get both of them. And say, let's get the Taylor Force Act passed. Numbers 202-224-3121. Write it down. Let's get the Taylor Force Act passed. Let's stop our taxpayer dollars going for terrorism. Well, in other news, investors are hoping for a rebound on Wall Street after another brutal sell-off on Thursday. Ephraim Graham has that story from the CBN newsroom. Ephraim?
Gordon, stocks have suffered through some of the worst losses in 2 years, but many experts say it's important to keep an eye on the longer term.
I'm not overly concerned about the market volatility. I think the fundamentals are quite strong.
Just as markets go down very quickly, they tend to recover very quickly as well.
Some analysts say even if stocks don't recover quickly this time, they still expect the market to hit record highs again within several months. After early morning theatrics in the U.S. Capitol, lawmakers finally approved a spending plan, and President Trump has signed it. The deal appeased most Republicans and Democrats, but it infuriated budget hawks. Jennifer Wishon has more on how your tax dollars will be spent.
High drama in the U.S. Senate at midnight. Just as funding ran out for the government, Kentucky Senator Rand Paul mounted a one-man protest, forcing a temporary shutdown.
He's outraged the $400 billion bipartisan spending plan adds hundreds of billions to the nation's $20 trillion debt.
This is exploding. This deficit is exploding, and there isn't the alarm you should see.
Once Senator Paul stepped aside, the Senate passed the deal 71-28. As most Americans slept, blurry-eyed members of the House debated the measure into the early morning. Both sides got most of the spending they wanted. For the GOP, huge increases for defense. For Democrats, a big boost for domestic agencies. Also funding for disaster relief, children's health care, and opioid addiction.
This agreement will also allow us to step off this carousel of short-term funding bills that do nothing but hurt our military and stymie our ability to focus on other important agenda items.
Still, Democrats protested that the bill doesn't include a solution for America's so-called dreamers, illegal immigrants brought here when they were young.
All we want is a chance. All we want is an opportunity to address these issues that are important to our communities. Please, please, please give us that opportunity.
Speaker Paul Ryan promises to work on an immigration measure, one President Trump can support.
My commitment to working together on an immigration measure that we can make law is a sincere commitment. We will solve this DACA problem.
Sometimes I think the Speaker thinks he's Speaker of the White House, not the Speaker of the House of Representatives.
The House easily passed the spending plan early this morning. President Trump is expected to sign it. In fact, the White House never showed signs it was concerned the bill wouldn't pass. Now that the government is funded for 2 years, Congress can operate outside the constant threat of a government shutdown. Jennifer Wishon, CBN News, Washington.
And Gordon, the president has already signed that bill.
So good news is we have a funded government. Bad news is we're continuing to rack up deficits. We're now over $20 trillion in national debt. And what should we look for? Well, what are the signs of when will the world stop buying our paper? Because that's essentially what's going on. The world is financing our deficit. You look at the Treasury bill auctions this week, and one of the causes of the stock market going down is the Treasury bill is now paying more than 3% a year. That's the latest auction as of yesterday for both the 10-year note and the 30-year note. Well, at what point, as that interest rate goes up, when you start thinking about paying interest on a variable rate on $20 trillion of debt, at what point does the interest payment alone start to dwarf everything else we're doing? We've had some artificial stimulus coming in from the Federal Reserve to keep those payments low. And as long as that Federal Reserve rate was below 2%, okay, 2% on 20 trillion doesn't sound like a whole lot. But when you start talking 5%, and I remember back in the 1970s, T-bill rates being over 15%. Well, 15% on 20 trillion is a lot of money. So how are we going to pay for that? What does that mean for future deficits when you start paying your interest with debt? This is unsustainable in the long term. Everyone knows it, but we don't seem to have the political will to stop it.